'Tis the time of year for resolutions. New Year's resolutions. Well, in this particular case, it's not necessarily resolutions we're going to be covering. We're going to be sharing some reflections on the year that was, maybe some reflections on things that I want to do in the new year. I'm not going to call them resolutions, and there's going to also be a rant. And that's what's coming up right after this intro plays.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 395 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. This is a solo episode, and I am recording this from a hotel room in Fort Washington, Pennsylvania, which is just north of the city of Philadelphia, and I'm here this weekend for Bubba Bash, which is a Rush tribute-themed celebration. It's a concert by a whole bunch of amazing performers in tribute of Rush and in honor of Neil Peart, who did die several years ago, the very first week of January. This is a fundraising event. This is the third one. The second one that I've been to, I'm meeting up with my good friend Kevin Anderson, as well as a whole bunch of other amazing people that I met here last year, and other Rush fans that I know and love. And that's happening on Saturday, but I had to travel today. I'm recording this on January 2nd. I basically spent over 8 hours in the car getting myself down here. I am meeting with one of my clients tomorrow morning for breakfast who lives in Philadelphia. I've been working with him for several years now. And I'm going to be picking up Kevin and some other good folks from the airport tomorrow and just hanging out and having some Rush funness. But it all has to do with the R's because, resolutions, rants, reflections, etc. So I am going to forego the comments. I am going to do a quick ad read, and then I'm going to get into the rant and reflections from the road in this very, very young 2025. This episode is sponsored by the awesome folks who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections, as well as the awesome folks who are my coffee my coffee buddies. I can't speak, apparently. Driving for over 8 hours does that to you. Anyways, and my coffee buddies, and I'm going to leave this in, I'm not going to cut it out. My coffee buddies over at buymeacoffee.com. I am so thrilled and so appreciative of the support that I get from my coffee buddies, as well as my awesome patrons. You guys are helping keep the lights on. It does help pay for the hosting fees, as well as for some of my time in producing this podcast. And I still have to give a shout out to Nikki Gerlain, who has caffeinated me out the wazoo. I'm bouncing off the ceiling with all of the coffee that Nikki has provided to me. So a huge thank you to Nikki and to all of the awesome folks who every month support me via Patreon. I just did some, as this episode is about, I just did a look through my income and my expenses, and I just realized how expensive the hosting fees are as the downloads continue to grow for the podcast, which is fantastic. But the hosting fees continue to go up with some of the space that, as well as new episodes, the space that I need. And it is great to know that the support that I get from you guys is helping to cover those costs, as well as keep me in the black, not in the red. And I am just so appreciative of that, because this episode, I am going to be getting into a lot of the logistics of the costs and expenses, especially since I spent several days towards the end of 2024 going through and tallying those expenses. I still have probably another good 8 hours of work to do, just going back and capturing some of the other things that I neglected to record. And I'll talk a little bit more about my plans for getting better at that in 2025. But more importantly, going to share some of those insights that I think are going to be valuable to you. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. This is the ad read. All I wanted to say was thank y'all for your support over at patreon.com/darkreflections, as well as buymeacoffee.com/Mark Leslie. Okay, as mentioned, I wanted to talk a little bit about the planning that I've done. As I mentioned, prior to that bumper plane, I've spent several days over the holidays going through, not the full day, but a good 4 or 5 hours every day, going through, finding receipts, printing them off, making physical copies of them, putting them in an envelope, and checking them off in my ledger, which is a spreadsheet that I have that I end up giving to my accountant to file my taxes. And I had neglected, I probably had the first couple months of 2024 relatively up to date with the monthly expenses and income and stuff like that. Most of the other expenses that came in, when I got the email receipt or whatever, I flagged it in Gmail. So I gave it a flag, or a tag, I should say, and then put it in a folder. And I have folders for income and expenses for each of the years. So I can find them there easily, but sometimes I miss them. I was traveling and I missed the stuff that came in. And so it's just been a little bit of a nightmare. And I've backed myself into this corner, painted myself into this corner numerous times. So what I've decided to do, this is part of, I guess, sort of resolution-y or revolution, I don't know. But what I've gone and done is for the first Friday of every month, I'm going to go ahead and get caught up on basically the previous 4 weeks, the previous month's transactions. I'm going to try to stay on top of recording them as they came in, and I did. Earlier this morning, before I got on the highway, I recorded my Libsyn, which is, I have 2 expenses for Libsyn. One's writing related, and this one for Stark Reflections, as well as MailChimp and Adobe, I think, are the 3 receipts. And I went ahead and I printed them off, and I filed them, and I recorded them. I'm usually really good for the first few weeks of the year, but I got off to a good start there. And so I'm starting off with just having the first Friday of every new month going back and just taking a look at the previous 4 weeks. And one of the things that's important to me, and this is for anyone who's like me who doesn't live in the U.S. but pays a lot of stuff in the U.S., not only is it, whatever, $15 US for this charge, but that could be $18.63 or whatever that turns out to be in Canadian dollars, and it's going to be different. And it's not necessarily dependent upon the Bank of Canada exchange rate. It's what my credit card company charges me. And so I've been going into, I'm looking at just doing all of my expenses on a single card, and that's the only place that I do credit card expenses. So I'm thinking of that as another option, and that way I won't. So right now I'm going to 3 different credit cards and going, oh yeah, this subscription comes out of the MasterCard, and this one comes out of this Visa as well. So trying to narrow that down and say, okay, this is my business one, and all of my writing business related expenses are all going to go on this one card. So I know that every single line on every single statement, none of it is personal. All of it is expenses for work. And I think that might be a better way of tracking them down, because I have to go in and say, okay, here's the charge from this company. I have the receipt in American dollars, but then I have to print it off. What I do, because my accountant likes to have the printouts, I print it out. I put what the conversion rate was, like 1.39468 or whatever it was, and then what the Canadian equivalent is. And then also the other thing, because I'm having to pay taxes, because once you make over, I think once I hit $30,000 a year in income, I had to start paying tax, not income tax. I had to pay HST, GST, etc., to the Canadian government on my earnings from Canadian sources, but I also have to track with the expenses what I'm paying in those taxes, because there's just a whole different thing with the business. And I'm not a tax advisor, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not an accountant. What I do know, because my accountants help me understand what I need to record in the spreadsheet. But tip for you, so this is the first reflection, the first tip is putting aside that time. And what I'm thinking about as I'm recording this is I might actually just put an hour aside on the first Friday of every month for the previous month, but I'm thinking it might make sense if I block an hour every single Friday, even if I don't use that full hour, it's in my calendar. It's a reminder to go back and say, all right, bozo, what did you miss tracking for that last week? And then that way I'm always on top of it. And if I miss a week, then it's only 2 weeks I'm looking at. And then I'm thinking that might be a better way to do it. I'll see how that works. But I'm going to play the bumper, and I think, wouldn't you like to hear a little bit of a rant? And it's rant time. So this first rant is based on several discussions that I've had with a number of author friends over the last month and a half, the last 2 months, and in particular in the last several weeks. And it has to do with what many of us are seeing on social media, and in particular Facebook groups, is those end-of-year posts about earning achievement. But don't get me wrong, I am so excited. I am so excited when I see those earning achievement posts, because I am so thrilled for writers who have made it. And especially, they've been working at it and they finally hit a certain landmark. But here's the downside to that. And this is an important thing that I think you should pay attention to, especially if you're seeing these posts. You, dear listener, need to take them with a grain of salt. Here's why. I'm aware of the reality of the industry, and I'm going to get into that quite a bit later in what I'm going to share about my own income for this past year. But I know that most books that are published do not sell. Most writers do not make a lot of money. To be quite honest, in reality, of all of the books that are published every year, most of them are never going to make $100. And I know that sounds mean, and I know it sounds horrible, but if you are an author who has already made more than $100 from publishing a book, then you're doing pretty good. And that's cold comfort if your goal is to make a living off of it. But the reality is that most books just don't sell a lot. The sad thing that I see, and so you take a group that maybe has 40,000 people in it, and all it takes is there's probably maybe 500 people in that group, maybe even 1,000 people of those 40,000 people who are making 5 and 6 and even 7-figure incomes. That's 1 or 2%. I can't do the math in my head, but that's a very small percent. Most of the authors are not selling much, and a good majority of them are probably doing okay or making some pretty decent sales. But this is so frustrating because, again, I'm very happy for authors and I'm very proud of them. And when I see those posts, I like them and I comment and I congratulate them. I'm so thrilled that they share that because they've done it. And the thing is they don't necessarily share when things are shitty. They tend to share when they're doing really, really, really well. Because they're like, aha, I've made it. Haha, cool. I've made it. You can too. And that's great. And it's positive. And I love that. But another thing is they often don't share their achievements without sharing what they spent to get there. And that can be misleading. And I'll pick on myself. Now, I was sharing this with a friend I was messaging. I think it might have even been earlier today or it was yesterday. I can't remember. I'm just going to go back to the notes and take a look at it. But I recently posted on social media because, I'm guilty of pointing out the good things. But I recently ran some promotions, and I had this time around, which is my 10,000 word short story that kind of is a lead in into my Canadian Werewolf series. I ran some promotions on that as a free book. And then I also thought, what the heck, if people are going to read the free book, I want to make it really easy to move them from free to the first book in the series. I do have 7 books out now, so drop the first book, which is regularly $4.99, drop it to 99 cents. And maybe that'll make it a little bit more enticing. I thought, what the heck, I might as well run some promotions on Canadian Werewolf 2, just to see what could happen. But this was just for this time around. And I am guilty of going on social media and taking screenshots of my Amazon ranking and getting all excited because it was number 1 in all 3 of its categories in free. And I think it made it to 151 overall in the Amazon store for free, which is pretty good. I mean, it wasn't that many downloads, but it was enough to get it there in its categories. It's urban fantasy, superhero / humorous fantasy fiction, etc. But here's the thing that's not shared, right? Yay, I'm number 1, haha, and lots of people congratulated me, and I was very excited about that and stuff like that. Here's the reality. It cost me $150 in promo feeds, and that was via Written Word Media, and I did the Hello Books and Free Booksy and one of the other places that they link to. So I did a bit of a stack just post Christmas. And it just sort of finished off. I think I ran something from Crave Books as well, but roughly cost me about $150 in promo dollars with Written Word Media and Crave Books, just to get some love over the course of about 5 days. And they ran out yesterday, and now when I'm looking back at it, I'm just going to quickly toggle over. I'm going to look back, and okay, so the last January 2nd, okay, I only had 13 downloads of this time around, and 4 copies of a Canadian Werewolf in New York sold, because the promo was over, and so that's kind of back to normal. And but in any case, I sold that much. But what did I earn so far? I spent $150. I ranked high. I'm number 1, etc. I got lots of people in to grab the free book. Most people who grab the free book are never going to read it. I've only earned $30 so far on that, so I'm $120 in the hole right now, January 2nd, looking at, credit card fee versus what I've already paid. And of course, I'm not going to get that money for 90 days. And of course, there's money coming in from previous months, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all covered the way that works. But that particular promo has only is still 120 in the hole. Now, the long-term goal is that enough people who grabbed the book for free and me even got the 99-cent book, and I made 35 cents off that, are going to like it enough. And I did. Over the course of the promo, I did start to sell Stowaway, which is book 2 in novella length in the series, so it's even cheaper. I think it's only $3.99 instead of $4.99. So I sold a handful of those prior to that, and I think that's included in the $30 that I've made so far. But as they move on and buy Fear and Longing in Los Angeles and Fright Night's Big City and Lover's Moon and Hex in the City and Only Monsters in the Building, hopefully I'll move enough people through that I actually can start making my money back. But this is back to the reality. If you saw my social media posts, it looks all sunshine and rainbows. It does not reveal how much money I spent. One of my friends I was talking to saw someone, and I don't know who this was, but had shared that they made $104,000 in sales last year, and they spent $100,000 on ads. Okay, they're $4,000 ahead, which is great. Good for them. Who has $100,000 to spend on ads, for one? But that's the thing, is we don't know what the expenditures were. And I'm going to read this quote from Marie Long that was posted on Facebook on January 2nd. And I really liked it. And I did thank Marie for sharing it. And this is what Marie Long shared. And I'm going to borrow her rant to add to mine, because I think she did a great job with this. And this is what she says. She says, "Unpopular opinion, but I feel like I have to say it every year as a reminder. The Amazon screenshots are getting exhausting, and it's sending the wrong message to new authors who think all they have to do is X and make Y figures. This is especially true for some of those veteran authors who are posting screens and not adding a disclaimer about net versus gross plus expenses / taxes. I understand the need to celebrate the wins, and people should definitely do that. But there are a lot of new authors coming on the scene this year, and they are seeing these endless screenshots. It's setting them up for painful lessons in the future. In today's competitive market, it's not solely about writing a great book anymore, nor is it solely about having a great cover, great blurb, great metadata, etc. I saw the same thing happen with the screenshots 4 to 5 years ago, and it began the trend of authors going into that hustle culture to the point that they burnt out, went into serious debt, and or quit the business entirely. New authors, please do not be disillusioned by the screenshots. There's always a bigger story behind them that might not have been told in its entirety. Why am I saying this? Because once upon a time, I was one of those newbie authors who fell for the screenshots. And I almost quit the writing business altogether because I thought there was something wrong with me since I was not achieving at all. It took me a long time to learn the truth, and I lost a lot of time and money in the process. Don't be me, please. So again, that was indie author Marie Long who shared that. I thought it was perfect, and I love the message she has. Marie fell into that trap. I fall into that trap. So many authors fall into the trap of thinking they're doing something wrong and just feeling bad about themselves if they're not hitting those targets, or not seeing the fact that hitting those targets meant, yeah, okay, I made $50,000 this year, but I spent $40,000 to get there. Yes, $10,000 is good. But again, those are the things you don't see. And I love the fact that she wants to help authors not give up on themselves. And so the reason this rant is going on so long is I want to remind you, if your sales are not where you think they are, especially if you're seeing other people posting things, just remember there's so much more behind the scenes that you don't see when you see those posts. And there's a lot of those hidden expenses that you don't see. And I don't want you to give up because you think that they just got there because they're that much better. Their books are that much better, and you're not. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, and that's why when I get into some of the details later in this reflection for this episode, you're going to maybe be able to see, oh, okay, it looks like Mark did really well with this thing, but here's the reality. And I do want to share that reality so that you guys can kind of see the big picture. And that picture, big picture, wow, see, I'm tripping over my words, is going to come up right after this next bumper. Okay, so this is going to be a bit of a meandering reflection from the road. But I did spend some time yesterday going through some of my figures, some of my stats, some of my numbers, and also writing some of this out. I start on something, then I get sidetracked a little bit, and as you're used to, I'm sure, if you're a longtime listener. But I think there's a lot of details that you might find very useful or valuable. So let me just start, and I'll see where this goes, as I may stick to the script and I may meander as I do. So for 2024, my overall book sales income was in the low to mid 5 figures. So there's nothing spectacular to write home about. Not quite enough to live on. I mean, the way I'm accustomed to living, which means that my consulting work helps to pad that income up higher so I can live the lifestyle I'm accustomed to. But I'm also doing well enough, even in just my writing sales, for me to be aware of how fortunate I am. And when I look at just my writing sales, I'm earning more from writing sales alone than I did even back when I was managing bookstores in the late 90s. So again, when I'm reflecting on just how lucky I am. Yeah, okay, I might have worked 60 to 80 hours a week back then. And maybe I work that much now. It doesn't feel like as much because a lot of it's done from home and on my own time. Again, there's things I don't have to deal with as a writer that I had to deal with working in retail. But let's get into a bit of a breakdown. If you look at my sales from my writing income sales from 2024. Okay, when it comes to dollars, 55% of those dollars that I earned came from Amazon. I'm a wide author, but Amazon's still a big chunk of my change. 30% of that came from a combination of traditional publishing, direct sales, in-person sales, and other digital platforms that were outside of the big retail and library channels that most people think about. And then 15% of those sales came from the larger retail and library channels online. So this would be like the Apple and Barnes & Noble and Kobo and all of those other larger ones that most people know. So 55% from Amazon, 30% from traditional publishing, direct sales, and sort of other platforms, and then 15% came from larger retail and library channels. So again, 55% from Amazon, and then the other, 45% from the other wide platforms as well. And wide going well beyond the traditional thoughts of wide, which is just the online stores. When it comes to units, 50% of the units came from Amazon. 28% of my units came from the traditional direct and other sources, and 22% of the units came from the larger retail and library channels. Again, so it's more of 60 40, I guess. No, wait, how did 48 50? Yeah, 50-50. Amazon is only 50, so it's a little bit more balanced in terms of it not being all about all Amazon all the time. When I look at my free units, 73% of those free units were on Amazon, and 14% of my free units were on Google Books. And Google Books is not my second highest big retailer, but definitely lots of freegans there. 7% of my free books are from Apple, and 6% is basically from all the other platforms combined. As well. And I did not count, those are just the free online units. I did not count the stuff that I gave away for free in person and stuff like that with cards and stuff like that. I didn't even bother tracking that. So where my books sold, 49% of those sales came from the US. 41% came from, I'm just going to call that sort of the rest of the world, and this is the countries not mentioned now. So 6%, those countries were Canada, 6%, Australia, 1%, Netherlands, 1%, and Belgium, 1%. And again, I'm kind of rounding up to 1%. Everything else was, below 0.8 or 0.7%, and they all added up. Lots of small countries added up to 41%. Again, wide in terms of the world, which is kind of cool. Now, for the formats, 25% of my sales came from ebook sales. 71% came from paperback. Haha, interesting. Different. And I'm mostly an indie author. Yeah, I have traditionally published books, etc., but a lot of those came from in-person sales as well. 3% were hardcover sales, and 1% of my sales came from audio. In terms of genre earnings for this last year, 20% of my earnings came from fiction, and 80% came from nonfiction. Now, those stats do not include the books that I publish by other authors. I earned roughly $4,000 from publishing 20 books from other authors. And that wasn't 20 just last year. This is 20 in total over the several years that I've been doing this. And on those, I'm usually keeping about 15 to 30% of the income that comes in, and the author is getting the other 75 or 70% as well. That's from the earnings or the margin. And again, that's because I have a special deal. I'm not a real publisher. I'm more like an agent who's working on behalf of doing some of the logistics to get these books out. In many of the cases, the books have either already been edited by the time they get to me. Maybe I'm only spending the expenditure on some marketing and cover design work, so I'm keeping a much smaller percent because the majority of the costs on the editing, etc., have fallen on those authors. Because again, I'm not a real publisher. I'm doing this, and publishing these books takes a lot of work and a lot of time for not a lot of money. That's more of a, when you think of 20 books to 50K, that's 20 books to 4K. But I'm publishing these books not because I believe I'm going to get rich off them. I'm publishing them because they're great books, and they're usually by friends, and they're books that I believe the world benefits from. And I'm very proud and very honored that I get to work with these amazing authors and get their fantastic books into the world, but this is not something that is going to pay my bills. It's a very small sliver. Now, maybe it's because I'm keeping a small percentage, but again, I'm not investing the big bucks in editing and et cetera, so I don't feel justified in taking more than a smaller percentage for doing some of that logistical work. Now, here's another breakdown I want to get into, and I want to get into this because I want to share this, and I've talked about it a lot in the past 6 months. So this past year, I released the 20th anniversary edition of my book, One Hand Screaming. I did the beer tie-in with it, etc., and I did a Kickstarter for it, and I talked about it a lot. Okay, so for that one, I earned about $5,000 from the Kickstarter, and another $1,500 in sales. So that brought in a total of $6,500. I'm rounding this, of course, just to make the numbers cleaner and nicer. It's going to be $6,473 or whatever it was. But so about $6,500. Okay, seems pretty good, actually. I mean, well, some authors would look at that and go, I made that this week or I made that this month. But, for a collection of short stories in the horror genre, not bad earnings at all. Now, here's the costs that were involved in that. Okay, got $6,500. So this was, where did it go? Oh, I have it on a different screen. I'm going to have to go to the other screen. Where did that screen go? Here it is. Okay, so art, design, cover, editorial came to $1,700. Printing came to $850. Warehousing fees, this is one I put in a traditional warehouse. My warehousing fees came to $300. My shipping fees, this is the shipping the rewards or Kickstarters, as well as shipping to the warehouse, etc., came to $550. This would also be shipping copies to reviewers, etc. My launch expenses, because I did several launches, came to about $750. Might have been a little bit more because I just realized I didn't add all the expenses from my trip to Ottawa to go and do that launch. But yeah, so let's just round it down to $750. My advertising and marketing expenses, because I did actually do some print ads in Rue Morgue magazine, a horror magazine, as well as some other marketing I did with Bargain Booksy and stuff like that, BookBub ads, etc. $1,000, even ads for the Kickstarter that I did online, and then about $150 in miscellaneous supplies. So my expenditures came to $5,300. So I made $6,500 off of this book, but I spent $5,300. So I ended up with $1,200, which is good. It's a positive, but it's not as big as it looks when you first see that I got, $5,000 Kickstarter and $1,500 in sales. Now, this is a book, the first version of One Hand Screaming was out for 20 years before I made it out of print and not available anymore. And, this book could continue to sell. It's not going to sell that well in the future years. It's going to continue to bring in revenue over the years. So I started off in the black. Now, this also doesn't include, I didn't go back and try to divvy up the payments that I made to Creative Edge PR. When Mickey booked me for interviews for the book and stuff like that, there's different charges for that PR work. I didn't include that. And this also doesn't include the income from the warehoused books. So the books I paid to put in the warehouse cost me $300 plus some shipping. But I don't know how much I'm going to make. I'm actually going to make only just probably a couple dollars off of those because of all the sharing I have to do. with the wholesaler and even the publisher who I'm renting the space from, keeping a bit of a cut. But that's just to give you a bit of a look at the reality of, One Hand Screaming and how that turned out in the end. So I hope that was useful to you. I'm going to take a quick break so I can clear my throat, take a drink, play a bumper, and then do the rest of my reflection. Okay, let's see if I can get through the rest of this without taking another break. Let me go back to this low to mid 5-figure income from my writing. And the reason I want to come back to this is related to the rant earlier. So for anyone listening, if you're being down on yourself, because maybe you're not yet earning mid 5 figures a year, let's break down my titles. Let's take a look at that. It's not like I just have a handful of books. I've been at the writing gig for 40 years, and I did self-publish my first book 20 years ago. I have 39 full-length books available on the open market, meaning you could purchase. 39 of my books are still available to purchase somewhere online, art out of print or whatever. Now that seems like a lot. It seems like a lot of books, particularly if you look at the 20 books to 50K concept. But those 39 books are not all contributing to earning in the same way. Let's break that down. 11 of those books are anthologies, which don't really make much money. Now, anthologies in the traditional sense are books that I was paid by a publisher. I was paid in advance for that. But don't earn anything more on them. Once they're published, I don't earn another dime off of them, except for when I do purchase print copies from the publisher for resale. Then I do earn some margin on those, but that's, they're off the table in terms of a lot of the royalties. Only 3 of the anthologies of those 11 actually earn me royalties, because these are the ones that I've published under Stark Publishing, under my own imprint. So I'm the publisher, so I'm actually making money on those. But anthologies barely sell. I mean, they might sell when they first come out and stuff like that, but they barely sell. And the majority of authors who are in anthologies don't really do anything to push them. So it's not like you're going to make a lot of money going, hey, everyone's going to get in on this, everyone's going to sell this. No, no. That does not happen most of the time. So I'm going to take those off the table too. Just for the reality. So I took a look at the 3 anthologies that I earn royalties on, just from online sales, and their earnings combined maybe in 2024 brought in somewhere between $100 to $150 in online sales for 2024. Okay. Each book, they didn't, but each book roughly brought in $50 in online sales. Okay, so not huge earners. Now, a couple of other anthologies didn't earn me anything via online sales channels because they were traditionally published, but did earn me some money in direct sales and in-person sales. One of them, for example, brought in over $130 alone in print sales. But you got to remember, that seems, yay, $130. So let's look at the cost. The cost for those means I ended up only actually earning a profit of maybe 20 to 30% of that total. So maybe I brought in $40 off of that, right after having to spend that money up front. So again, seems good on the surface, but not necessarily as big at the end. Now let's look at, of the books I've published, an additional 8 other books that aren't already off the table because they're anthologies. 8 other books are from traditional publishers. Now, they do bring in money via royalty payments, but the advances received for those books came to me years ago when they were first published. Now, I do make some money from those books via their availability in Canadian libraries, thanks to the Writers' Union of Canada and Canada Council for the Arts, and their support of the Public Lending Rights Program, which we have in Canada and exists in 36 or so countries around the world, not the U.S. But most of the money that I earn on those traditionally published books usually come from direct sales at in-person events. I purchase them for anywhere from 20 to 40% off the cover price, and then I resell them. meaning a $25 book costs me anywhere from $15 to $20 to purchase, and I earn the margin between that cost and the retail price. I also absorb the tax that I have to pay the Canadian government because I've programmed my Square reader not to add tax, because if it's $25 and someone wants to pay cash, it's just easier to, here's $25, and then I incorporate the tax into the price, so I pay that. It comes out of my pocket. It's not added on to the cost. It's just easier for those in-person sales. So a $25 costs anywhere from $15 to $20 to purchase. I have to pay the government's 5% of the entire retail price. So a $25 book means I'm paying roughly $1.25 in tax. And then there's another processing fee if I've taken a credit card payment or debit card payment. It's usually about 3%. And so that's roughly, let's say, 75 cents. So that means there's $2 in fees and taxes coming out of my margin. So if I've paid $20 for a book that I'm selling for $25, that means I'm only earning $3 on it. Okay, doesn't seem like a lot, but that's still $1 more than I earn for most of my traditionally published books when I get the royalties from the publisher. And in this particular example of the $25 book I'm thinking of, my royalty is 8%, which comes to about $2. Yes, in the long run, when my royalties do come in 1 year later, that book will have earned me the $3 in direct sales, because I purchased it through a bookstore or whatever, plus the additional $2 royalty. So I will eventually get $5 in total for that. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to ignore the 30% withholding against returns that most traditional publishers employ, meaning I don't really make the $2. I make $1.40 because 60 cents of that is withheld for another year. But that just complicates it even more. But speaking of advances, this is where I'm going to take a bit of a sidetrack. I will be receiving an advance on a book that I'm writing this year in 2025 for a contract that I signed in late December with a small traditional publisher from Hamilton, Ontario, Wolsack and Wynne. They will be publishing my book Ghosts of the Great Lakes, which we signed the contract for in December. That book will be coming out in 2026. So again, with traditional publishing, there's a bit more of a delay. It's due with them at the end of this year. So it's due, I think it's due back to the editor or the publisher there December 1st, 2025. And I'll probably be sending updates to Noelle there, my editor and the publisher. Or no, she won't be editing it, but she'll be doing a lot of developmental stuff with me as I'm working on it. But and I'll be getting a small advance from them. That advance will be $1,000. Now, here are 4 great things about working with Wolsack and Wynne. And I've known Noelle for several years, and I'm pretty thrilled that I get to do a book with her because I have a lot of respect for the work that she does. And it's a very small operation. Now, 4 great things about Wolsack and Wynne. First, their contract is the most generous contract I've seen from a small press. That's a real small press. I mean, this is a publisher that actually has traditional print distribution and is not built upon a print-on-demand only business, which many people are. It's built on offset printing and warehouse and distribution, etc., not the stuff that anyone can just do. They don't even split the advance into thirds like a lot of publishers do. So a lot of publishers will divide it up into thirds. So the thirds thing might have been a thing in the days of advances. You know, at the low end, the advances might have been $5,000 to $10,000 back in the day. But as Noelle at Wolsack and Wynne said, when I asked about that, I was like, why didn't you divide it up? She says it's only $1,000. So splitting it into thirds, which is 1/3 upon signing the contract, 1/3 upon delivery of the manuscript, 1/3 upon publication, is more work than it's worth. She pays the advance upon publication. It's fine with me. Not that $333, at each of those stages is anything to sneeze at. I mean, a buck is a buck after all. But it's fine to get it all at once too, since it's really not that much money to begin with. So, okay, I don't get that money until I turn the manuscript in next December. Fine, no big deal. I have other income coming in. So again, that's why it's not like just one book a year. Now, second, other thing I love about Woolsack and Win is the royalties have a sliding scale, which is nice, and I don't see that a lot. I'd like to see that more. So for the first 1,499 copies sold, I earn 12%, which is much nicer to start with than the permanent 8% that I've received from most of the other contracts I've signed with publishers. Now that works out to $3.50 for a $25 book instead of $2, I think, if I did that. No, at $3 a book. Sorry, I can't do the math. Instead of $2. So the way advances work is that since I'm getting $1,000 in advance, I don't earn any money until I've earned out the advance. So at $3 a book, my royalties are going to pay off that advance. So I need to sell 333 copies before I start actually earning royalties. That's how advances work. So with Dundurn, for example, on a $1,000 advance, I didn't start earning on my $2 per book sold until 500 copies were sold. The good news with most of the books that I published with them is that I usually started earning out my advance the first month or two the book actually came out. But let me pause and do a reality check here because I've worked in the Canadian book industry for a long enough time. Most books in Canada are maybe going to sell an average of 100 copies. Anything that actually sells 500 copies or more is doing really well. Again, there's books that do tens of thousands of copies, but most books are not gonna move beyond the low hundreds. So let's go back to this sliding scale. So I start off earning 12% on the first 1,499 copies sold. Then I earn 14% on units from 1,500 to 4,999, which is $3.50 a unit. And from 5,000 copies or more, I earn 16%, which goes up to $4. So again, I like the sliding scale because as the book continues to sell, my earnings increase as the publisher makes back their initial investment. So I really love that. That's a very generous way for a publisher contract. Again, the sliding scale is relatively rare. I've only seen it a few times. I remember talking to a publisher in France several years ago at one of the book fairs there, and I was really impressed with their very advanced sliding scale. But again, this is a reminder that most books that are published are not going to sell more than 100 copies or so, at least here in Canada. Maybe it goes up as high as 1,000 in the US. But most books published never earn out their advance either. I've been lucky. All of my traditionally published books have earned out their advances. Now again, my advances are relatively small in the grand scheme of things, but that's fine with me because I'd rather be in a position where both me and my publisher are making decent money. So if they've earned the advances earned out, it means it's a book that's doing relatively well for them. And I do think that with Ghosts of the Great Lakes, Woolsack and Win and I can actually earn back our investment into this book in a decent way. The third great thing about this book with Woolsack and Win is that it's Ghosts of the Great Lakes. Now, most of my true ghost story books have been set in a single Canadian city. Haunted Hamilton, Spooky Sudbury, Creepy Capital, Macabre Montreal. Meaning the interest level diffuses the further away from the city you go. I mean, the Sudbury book tends to sell well to Sudbury people, the Hamilton book to Hamilton people, etc., etc. So the way I've broken down a Venn diagram for these books are, for example, for Haunted Hamilton, people who like ghost stories, people who enjoy history, and people who love reading about Hamilton, or replace that with people who love reading about their city or their hometown. But here's the cool thing with Ghosts of the Great Lakes. When I look at it, when I actually was just doing some research when I was considering the idea of the book with Noelle, I have at least 100 different cities and towns that border the Great Lakes to write about. Cities all around the Great Lakes and on both sides of the border. One major province, Ontario in Canada, with larger locales and cities such as Toronto, Hamilton, Niagara Falls, Kingston, Thunder Bay, Sault Ste. Marie, Manitoulin Island, and numerous cities in southern mid-Ontario and northern Ontario, and 7 states with numerous larger city centers like Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit, Buffalo, and Cleveland. This is a book that is likely to appeal to a much broader demographic, which can bode well for sales. And the fourth thing I love about Woolsack & Win is Noelle introduced me to a part of publishing I've never really explored before, Ontario Arts Council grants. So she suggested that I sign up for a grant to help in my research for this book, which will actually require a lot of travel to numerous locales for researching. I think I can get some really good stories when I'm actually there at local libraries in person, etc. So I went online, I found the site, I filled out all the paperwork, and the process did take me several hours. But within just a few weeks, I was awarded a grant. And on December 24th, I received $2,000. I received a check for $2,000 for research from the Ontario Arts Council. This basically extends my advance to $3,000 from $1,000, which is great. Again, it's not a lot of money, but I've got $2,000 in my bank now to pay for travel research and research while working on the book, and then I'll get $1,000 when the book is published. Okay, so that was a bit of an aside. But let's get back to the totals. No, I didn't forget. I just wanted to share some publishing insights so you can better understand why it is that I still enjoy working with some publishers, especially like Woolsack & Win. Okay, so 39 books. 11 of those books are anthologies. No royalties. That leaves 28 books. 8 of them are traditionally published, limited minor royalties. That brings the total down to 20 books. Of those books, 6 of them are co-authored, which means my royalties are roughly 50% instead of 100% on those. So instead of removing 6 of them, well, let's cut the number in half and say 3. So 20 minus 3 is 17. So I have 17 full-length books out there with decent earning potential, at least as an indie author. Which kind of tracks when you look at the 20 books to 50K philosophy. That philosophy assumes each book earns $2,500 a year. Now, my reality shows an average of earning per year that's closer to about $2,000 per book. And, of course, some of those books earn less than $1,000 a year, while others earn me 5 figures. But they average out to about $2,000 per book for the year. Again, this is not New York Times bestseller material. It's not 6-figure material or even high 5-figure earning material. But it's a decent earning, and it's a much appreciated source of income for something that I absolutely love. And while money is great, because money helps pay the bills and keeps me living a lifestyle where I'm not having to worry about where my next meal is coming from or the ability to keep a roof over my head, the money isn't everything. And I'll give you an example from just the other night, New Year's Eve. I read a comment from somebody on Instagram on one of my posts telling me they just finished one of my books as 2024 was coming to an end and they were looking forward to reading another one of my books to start off 2025. I thanked them, and then they direct messaged me an image of them with my book and explained why they loved it and how much they loved it and were so excited that they found it. And that they could tell when they were reading it how much of my own passion, energy, and love I put into that book. That comment is in many ways worth more to me than the money that book brings in. Why? Because it means I've connected with someone. A book that I invested a lot of time, energy, and passion into resulted in enhancing someone else's experience. That is absolute magic. And it's not something I could ever put a price on. I know it sounds corny and counterintuitive, particularly since a guy does need to eat and be protected from the elements, particularly in this Canadian climate. But the main reason I'm writing is not to earn a lot of money. It's for that. I create something and someone else picks it up and it resonates with them. I can't put $1 on that. And again, it's not going to pay the bills. But wow, that is so powerful. That's one of the reasons why I don't want you to give up on your writing. Because there's probably someone out there who's going to read what you've written. And it's going to make a difference. And here's the sad reality. You're probably never going to hear from them. Just know that your writing did make that difference. You see it. You look at your dashboard. Sold. Sold here, sold there, sold wherever. You most likely will never hear from most of the people who read your books. If you do, that's bonus. That's delightful extra magic and bonus. But know that when you've put so much of yourself into a book and you've put it out there, you have probably impacted someone else in a positive way. And isn't that amazing? I know I started off talking about money and dollars. And I have to, especially because I was just doing some tracking for income tax purposes, etc., etc., etc. But I suppose it's a reminder that despite all of that tracking and all of that analytical look at the realities and the costs, etc., involved, doesn't it all just come down to that magic? That's one of the reasons why, despite how hard I work and how much I do, it doesn't really feel like work. It feels like I get to play with magic. That's the end of this episode. That's the end of this rant and reflection from the road. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hope it gave you something to think about. Would love to hear your own thoughts. You know how to get a hold of me. You can leave those comments at starkreflections.ca or wherever you're listening to the podcast. But other than that, that is it for this episode. And that is it for this week. So until next week and until next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you a fantastic 2025. And as always, great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomtech.com.